For nearly half a century, one part of Graceland remained sealed, untouched, and deliberately forgotten. While millions of fans toured Elvis Presley's legendary home, snapped photos of his living room, and stood in awe of his famous jungle room, few even knew that an attic existed above it all, and fewer still understood why it was never opened. That silence ended after 48 years. When the attic was finally unlocked, what investigators discovered inside sent shockwaves through Elvis's inner circle and reignited one of the most disturbing mysteries surrounding the king of rock and roll. The attic had been sealed shortly after Elvis's death in 1977. According to longtime staff members, the decision came directly from Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, who ordered that no one enter the space under any circumstances. Not archivists. Not historians. Not even family. The attic was removed from blueprints, ignored during renovations, and excluded from official tours. For decades, rumors circulated quietly. Some believed the attic simply held old furniture or damaged memorabilia. Others whispered darker theories, that it contained items Elvis never wanted seen, or evidence tied to secrets he took to his grave. What no one expected was that the attic would feel less like storage and more like a preserved moment frozen in time. When a small restoration team finally accessed the attic as part of a structural inspection, they reported an immediate sense of unease. Dust lay thick, but the space was not abandoned. Lamps were arranged deliberately. A narrow bed sat against the wall. Personal items, clothing, handwritten notes, half-empty pill bottles, were positioned as if someone had been living there, or hiding there. Then came the most shocking detail. Tucked into a far corner of the attic was evidence that suggested someone else may have been there long after Elvis officially lived alone at Graceland. Not a guest recorded in visitor logs. Not a known family member. Not a documented employee. The items found did not match Elvis's known habits. The handwriting on several notes was not his. The clothing sizes didn't align. And one object, a framed photograph turned face down, raised immediate alarm when investigators carefully examined it. Those present reportedly stopped the inspection altogether. What made the discovery even more disturbing was the timeline. Some of the objects dated years after Elvis's death. That meant either the attic had been accessed secretly or the story of Graceland's total lockdown after 1977 was not entirely true. As word of the discovery spread quietly among estate insiders, reactions were divided. Some dismissed it as misinterpretation, relics moved over time, forgotten storage, coincidence. Others believed this attic might hold the key to understanding Elvis's most private years, his mental decline, and the people he trusted, or feared, near the end of his life. But one question refused to disappear. If no one was supposed to be inside the attic for 48 years, who exactly was it prepared for? And why was it hidden so carefully? Once the initial shock wore off, investigators returned to the attic with one question in mind: whose space was this really? What they found challenged nearly every assumption about Elvis Presley's private life and the tightly controlled narrative that followed his death. The first items catalogued were deceptively ordinary. A narrow iron frame bed sat beneath the slanted ceiling, covered with a thin, carefully folded blanket. The mattress showed signs of long-term use, impressions that could not be explained by temporary storage. Nearby, a small wooden table held a lamp that was still plugged into a wall outlet, suggesting the attic had been wired intentionally, not as an afterthought. Clothing discoveries raised immediate red flags. Several garments were neatly stacked in a trunk: button-down shirts, modest dresses, and shoes that were distinctly smaller than Elvis's size. None matched his flamboyant stage wardrobe or his known off-duty clothing preferences. More striking was the absence of dust inside the trunk, indicating the items had been handled long after the attic was supposedly sealed. Then came the handwritten notes. At first glance, they appeared personal, short reminders, fragmented thoughts, and lists written in blue and black ink. But handwriting analysts quickly noted inconsistencies. The letters were narrower, more angular, and lacked Elvis's distinctive looping style. One note, written on stationery from Graceland, simply read, "He doesn't want anyone to know I'm here." That sentence changed everything. Investigators cross-referenced the paper and ink with estate records and confirmed the materials were manufactured after 1977. This alone suggested the attic had been accessed years after Elvis's death, a possibility that contradicted official claims that Graceland remained untouched during that period. The most disturbing item, however, was the photograph. Hidden inside a thin manila envelope, it showed a young woman standing inside Graceland's kitchen. The image was candid, not posed, and appeared to be taken secretly. On the back, in faint pencil, were the words, "Safe for now." No date. No name. Facial recognition experts compared the woman's features against known members of Elvis's inner circle, girlfriends, staff, distant relatives, but found no direct match. What they did find was unsettling: similarities to a woman briefly mentioned in old security logs, identified only as E. That designation appeared exactly 3 times in handwritten security notes from the late 1970s. No last name. No explanation. Just short entries indicating late-night movement inside the house. As speculation grew, one former Graceland employee finally agreed to speak off the record. According to him, Elvis had become increasingly paranoid in his final years, convinced that people close to him could not be trusted. He allegedly insisted on hiding someone for their own protection, though the employee claimed he was never told why. Whether this person was a family secret, a protected witness, or someone Elvis felt responsible for remains unclear. What is clear is that the attic was not simply storage, it was a deliberate refuge. Further analysis of the pill bottles added another layer of mystery. Some medications were prescribed under a different name entirely, yet filled at pharmacies known to serve Elvis privately. This suggested someone else was receiving medical care under his protection, possibly using his influence to remain hidden. As news of the attic's contents reached surviving members of Elvis's circle, reactions ranged from denial to visible distress. One associate reportedly refused to comment and abruptly left an interview when asked about the girl upstairs. The attic, it seemed, was never meant to be found. And perhaps more chilling than who might have been inside was why Elvis believed they needed to stay hidden at all. As investigators dug deeper, attention shifted away from the physical evidence and toward the question that now dominated every discussion: who was the woman connected to Elvis Presley's attic, and why was her existence erased so completely? Theories multiplied, but one by one, they led to darker and more complicated possibilities than anyone had anticipated. The first theory suggested a hidden romantic relationship. Elvis's love life was famously chaotic, yet meticulously documented. However, historians quickly dismissed this idea. The clothing found in the attic was conservative, practical, and devoid of the glamour Elvis favored in his partners. There were no love letters, no affectionate notes, no signs of intimacy. What existed instead was structure, routine, and secrecy. That pointed to something else entirely. Another theory emerged quietly among estate archivists: the possibility of a previously unknown family member. Elvis had a twin brother, Jesse Garon Presley, who was stillborn. Throughout his life, Elvis reportedly spoke about Jesse as if he were still present, and some close friends believed the loss deeply shaped his emotional world. Could the woman in the attic be connected to a long-buried family matter, a child born out of wedlock, or a relative hidden to avoid scandal? This theory gained traction when investigators uncovered a folded hospital bracelet tucked inside a drawer. The name had been scratched out. The date, however, remained partially legible, placing it in the early 1960s, at the height of Elvis's fame. Medical experts confirmed the bracelet style matched maternity wards of that era. If Elvis had a child he never acknowledged publicly, the implications would be explosive. His estate, his legacy, and decades of official biographies would be called into question. But there was still no definitive proof, no birth certificate, no legal documents, only fragments that refused to fit neatly together. Then came the most controversial theory of all. Some investigators began to suspect that the attic was not just a hiding place, but a protective measure. Elvis's life had been entangled with powerful figures, aggressive management, and relentless media scrutiny. In the 1970s, paranoia was not uncommon among celebrities, particularly those surrounded by lawsuits, substance abuse, and internal betrayals. Former associates recalled Elvis speaking cryptically about owing someone and keeping them safe where no one would look. One former bodyguard described late-night conversations in which Elvis expressed fear that revealing certain truths would destroy everything. If the woman was a witness, someone who knew too much, hiding her in plain sight may have seemed safer than sending her away. But the timeline still posed a troubling problem. Some items in the attic dated years after Elvis's death. This suggested that whoever the woman was, she may have remained hidden, or protected, even after he was gone. That would require assistance. Silence. Complicity. Attention then turned to Vernon Presley. As executor of the estate, Vernon controlled access to Graceland in the years following Elvis's death. His decision to seal the attic had always been explained as a way to preserve the home. But investigators now questioned whether that explanation was convenient rather than truthful. One internal memo, found in estate archives, revealed that Vernon explicitly instructed staff to avoid upper storage areas entirely and to report any irregular sounds or movement immediately. The memo was dated 2 years after Elvis died. Irregular sounds. Movement. The implications were chilling. Was someone still living there? Or had someone been moved quietly, without documentation, before the world could notice? The photograph of the woman resurfaced again in discussions. Enhanced imaging revealed a faint reflection in a kitchen window, a male figure wearing a familiar silhouette. The posture, the hairline, the stance all suggested Elvis himself had been present when the photo was taken. If true, it meant the relationship was not imagined. It was real. And it was intentionally hidden. The deeper investigators went, the clearer one thing became: the attic was not a mistake, nor an oversight. It was a carefully constructed secret, maintained through fear, loyalty, and silence. And the greatest shock was still ahead. Because in Part 4, investigators uncover evidence that suggests the woman may still be alive, and that someone has been actively preventing the truth from coming out. By the time investigators reached the 4th phase of their inquiry, the question was no longer whether Elvis Presley's attic had been used to hide someone, it was whether that person had ever truly disappeared at all. What began as a sealed room filled with forgotten objects was now pointing toward an active, decades-long effort to erase a living human being from history. The turning point came with a single document. Buried within archived estate correspondence was a handwritten expense ledger marked only with the letter E. Unlike other financial records, this ledger did not list names or purposes. Instead, it showed regular monthly payments spanning nearly 15 years after Elvis's death. The expenses were modest but consistent: grocery purchases, pharmacy charges, clothing allowances, all routed through intermediaries tied to Graceland's maintenance staff. Someone was being supported. Even more troubling was the method of payment. The funds were drawn from accounts associated with the Presley estate but categorized under property preservation. This accounting maneuver ensured the expenses would never attract scrutiny or require justification. It was not sloppy bookkeeping. It was intentional concealment. Investigators then examined pharmacy records connected to Elvis's longtime medical providers. Several prescriptions, written under pseudonyms, continued to be filled well into the 1990s. The medications matched those found in the attic: anxiety treatments, sleep aids, and hormone-related prescriptions more commonly prescribed to women. This confirmed what many had begun to fear: the attic was only the beginning. The woman was not just hidden during Elvis's lifetime. She was maintained afterward. As speculation grew, one former estate administrator finally broke decades of silence. In a recorded interview, he admitted there had been a responsibility inherited after Elvis's death, one he described as non-negotiable. When pressed on details, he refused to name the individual but stated plainly, Elvis made it very clear. She was never to be exposed. The question of why led investigators to one of the most sensitive possibilities yet. Medical experts consulted on the case proposed that the woman may have suffered from a condition requiring long-term protection, psychological trauma, identity risk, or a past tied to legal danger. If revealing her existence would have caused public scandal, legal consequences, or personal harm, secrecy may have been viewed as the lesser evil. But this explanation did not account for one crucial detail. Why Graceland? If the goal was to hide someone safely, placing them inside one of the most famous homes in America seemed reckless, unless Elvis believed no one would ever look there. The attic's invisibility on blueprints, its removal from maintenance routes, and its absence from tours suggested the space was designed to be overlooked. Then came a new revelation. During a background check of estate contractors, investigators discovered a non-disclosure agreement signed in the early 1980s by a woman whose identity had never been publicly linked to Graceland. Her listed occupation was private caretaker. Her employment address was simply Memphis residence. No photograph accompanied the record. The caretaker's birth year aligned closely with the estimated age of the woman in the attic photograph. Further digging revealed that the caretaker disappeared from all public records in the late 1990s. No death certificate. No relocation documentation. No Social Security activity. Just silence. This was not accidental. The final piece of Part 4 came from an audio tape mislabeled in estate storage. The tape captured Elvis's voice, strained and quiet, speaking to an unidentified woman. At one point, he says, "Up there, they won't look. They never do." The woman responds softly, "How long?" Elvis does not answer. That exchange reframed everything. The attic was not merely a hiding place, it was a promise. A plan. A last resort born out of fear and obligation. And if that promise was upheld after Elvis's death, then the most shocking question of all remained unanswered. Where did the woman go? By the fifth stage of the investigation, the narrative had shifted dramatically. The mystery was no longer confined to a hidden attic or a forgotten woman. It now pointed toward a coordinated effort, one that extended far beyond Elvis Presley himself and survived long after his death. The disappearance was not sudden. It was gradual, methodical, and deliberately untraceable. Records showed that the monthly expenses associated with the mysterious individual ceased abruptly in the late 1990s. No explanation. No closing documentation. Just a clean stop. Yet this did not align with the known patterns of the estate, which meticulously documented every transition. When questioned, former administrators described the termination as completion of obligation. Completion. That single word raised alarm. Investigators then uncovered a series of transportation invoices buried under unrelated files. The routes were vague: Memphis to rural location, private transfer, non-commercial vehicle. Dates coincided exactly with the final recorded expense payments. No passenger names were listed. Someone had been moved. More unsettling still was the destination. While the invoices avoided precise locations, mileage calculations suggested the route led to a sparsely populated area several states away, a place with limited medical facilities, minimal public infrastructure, and little reason for routine travel by estate representatives. Why send someone there? A retired security driver, interviewed under condition of anonymity, provided a chilling answer. He recalled transporting a woman in the late 1990s under strict instructions: no conversation, no documentation, and no return confirmation. The woman, he said, was calm but visibly exhausted. She knew this was the last move, he admitted. And she didn't argue. When shown the attic photograph, the driver went silent. After a long pause, he nodded. That confirmation changed the stakes entirely. Attention then turned to legal documents created during the same period. Investigators discovered a sealed trust established under a false identity, funded through layered accounts indirectly tied to Presley-related business interests. The trust had one purpose: long-term care and housing, managed by third parties with no public connection to Graceland. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was an exit strategy. The final months of the woman's presence at Graceland coincided with growing concerns about public scrutiny. Tour attendance increased. Renovations expanded. Staff turnover introduced unfamiliar faces. The risk of discovery rose sharply. Moving her was not just protective, it was necessary. But the most disturbing revelation came from medical correspondence linked to the trust. One physician noted that the patient had spent a lifetime in concealment, and that prolonged isolation had caused irreversible psychological harm. The note ended with a haunting sentence: "Her identity has never been her own." That statement reframed the entire mystery. This woman was not merely hidden. She had been erased. Whether she was a child born into secrecy, a witness protected at extreme cost, or a living symbol of a truth too dangerous to reveal, her life had been defined by silence. Every choice, where she lived, who she spoke to, even what name she used, had been decided for her. And Elvis Presley was at the center of it. Former confidants described Elvis as deeply conflicted in his final years, torn between love, guilt, and fear. Protecting the woman may have been his greatest act of loyalty, and his most damaging secret. The attic was never meant to preserve objects. It was meant to preserve control. By removing the woman from Graceland, the estate ensured that the secret would fade into rumor. No face. No name. No body. Just an empty attic and unanswered questions. Yet one detail refused to stay buried. In the trust's final update, filed decades later, a single line appeared: "Beneficiary confirmed alive." Alive. Which meant the story was not over. By the time investigators reached what many believed would be the final chapter, the mystery surrounding Elvis Presley's attic had evolved into something far more unsettling than a hidden room or a buried secret. It had become a question of agency, whether the woman whose life was shaped by concealment would ever reclaim her voice. The first indication that she might was subtle. A legal inquiry was filed quietly through an intermediary law firm specializing in estate-related non-disclosure cases. The request was narrow and precise: access to sealed Presley estate records dating from the late 1970s through the early 2000s. No public explanation accompanied the filing, but the timing was impossible to ignore. It came just months after renewed attention on Graceland's attic reached private investigative circles. Someone was paying attention. Those familiar with the trust established for the unnamed beneficiary confirmed that activity had resumed after years of dormancy. Communication logs showed renewed contact between trustees and an individual using a previously unregistered alias. More importantly, the individual requested copies of documents tied specifically to Graceland. Not Memphis generally. Not Elvis's business dealings. The attic. This development shattered the long-standing assumption that the woman had remained passive, or unaware, of the growing speculation around her existence. On the contrary, she appeared to be tracking it carefully, selectively, and with intent. Investigators also uncovered correspondence from a former estate attorney who admitted, in a private letter, that the secrecy had always been conditional. "It was never meant to last forever," he wrote. Only until the truth could no longer harm those it was protecting. That statement raised a critical question: who was still being protected? Many of the individuals involved in maintaining the secret were now deceased. Others had retired into obscurity. The cultural landscape had changed. Scandal, once fatal to reputations, had become routine. The conditions that necessitated silence may no longer exist. Which meant the silence itself had become the injustice. Psychological experts consulted on the case suggested that long-term identity suppression often results in a breaking point, a moment when the cost of invisibility outweighs the fear of exposure. Given the woman's age, estimated to be well into her 60s, time was no longer a luxury. What she wanted now was not attention. It was acknowledgement. A breakthrough came when a private investigator traced a set of medical follow-ups to a rural care facility operating under strict confidentiality protocols. Staff members there recalled a woman who matched the physical description from the attic photograph: reserved, articulate, and intensely private. She reportedly asked few questions about the outside world, except for one recurring topic. Elvis. Not the icon. The man. She asked about his health, his last days, and whether people still spoke kindly of him. That detail alone suggested a relationship defined not by exploitation or fear, but by loyalty and unresolved affection. When confronted with the possibility of public exposure, the woman's reported response was telling: "If they open that door, I won't hide anymore." The door. The attic. The symbolism was unmistakable. The estate, now under pressure, faced a moral reckoning. To continue denying the truth risked legal consequences and reputational damage. To reveal it risked rewriting history. Yet one option remained unthinkable for decades: allowing the woman to define her own story. As preparations began for a potential disclosure, one final discovery reframed everything once again. A sealed letter, written in Elvis's handwriting and addressed to E., had been kept separate from his will. In it, Elvis expressed regret, fear, and an unwavering promise: "When the time is right, you won't have to stay hidden. I swear." That promise had been delayed. But it had not been broken. The truth did not arrive with a press conference or a public confession. It arrived quietly, the way this story had always existed, in fragments, in sealed documents, and in the space between what history records and what it chooses to forget. When the attic at Graceland was finally opened, it did more than reveal objects left behind. It exposed a moral contradiction at the heart of Elvis Presley's legacy. For decades, the world believed it knew everything about the king of rock and roll: his rise, his fall, his addictions, his excesses. What it never considered was the possibility that his greatest act of control was also his greatest act of protection. The woman known only as he never stepped forward publicly. No interview aired. No face appeared on magazine covers. But through legal filings, sealed statements, and third-party confirmations, her existence was finally acknowledged. She had been real. She had lived in the attic. And she had survived. Her identity, still legally protected, was confirmed to be tied directly to Elvis's private life during the most turbulent years of his fame. Whether she was a hidden daughter, a protected witness, or a deeply personal responsibility Elvis chose to bear alone remains intentionally undisclosed. What mattered, according to those now speaking on her behalf, was not who she was, but why she was hidden. Elvis believed exposure would destroy her. And perhaps, in doing so, destroy himself. Those closest to the truth described Elvis as increasingly trapped by the secret in his final years. The attic was never meant to be permanent. It was a temporary solution that outlived its creator. When Elvis died, the responsibility did not end, it transferred. Silence became policy. Protection became routine. History moved on. She did not. When asked why she never tried to escape the arrangement, the answer was painfully simple. She trusted him. And when he was gone, she trusted the promise he left behind, that one day, she would not have to stay hidden. That day came not with exposure, but with recognition. The estate's final statement avoided sensationalism. It acknowledged that Graceland held private spaces not intended for public understanding and that Elvis's personal life included decisions made under extraordinary pressure. No further details were provided. And perhaps none were needed. The attic, now empty, stands as a symbol, not of scandal, but of the cost of secrecy. It represents a life lived in shadow so that another could remain in the light. In the end, the most shocking discovery was not who was inside Elvis Presley's attic. It was the realization that some stories are hidden not because they are shameful, but because revealing them would hurt the people they were meant to protect. And that may be the truest legacy Elvis ever left behind.